Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of In Conversation, our Claresholm Public Library series of conversations and chats with really interesting people from in and around this area who have great stories to tell. And our guest today, if you've been to an event in or around Claresholm over the last few years, you've probably seen this gentleman with maybe a camera or maybe a movie camera, or do they even call them movie cameras anymore? Probably video. But that said, this gentleman is Alec Harrison, and he's a Claresholm resident who does some really cool stuff. We're going to find out about it today on In Conversation. Alec, welcome to In Conversation, and thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about Alec Harrison sort of today. Maybe take me on a bit of the journey that first of all, maybe brought you to Claresholm and also brought you to some of the really interesting things that you do that we're going to talk about.
Sure. So I started in a career in music pretty much right out of high school. So I knew early on when I was very young that I wanted to write music for movies. That was the dream. And as I got older, it never went away. And so I had an opportunity when I was, I think, grade 12, to contribute some music to like a fly fishing show. It was like a outdoor life thing, and I had a personal connection to the gentleman in it and the producer, and then from there I got a job at a recording studio in Calgary when I was about 20, and I've been there ever since. And so once my wife and I started a family, I moved the studio home where we lived in the city, and I've been working remotely for about 15 years. And so that nature of working remotely allowed me to, when the time was right, to actually move to a small town, which is what we'd always talked about doing. And I honestly hadn't really heard of Claresholm until we came to look at a house about 7 years ago. And we found a house we fell in love with. My dad lived with us for a while, and it fit the bill, and my studio was separate from the house, which probably saved my marriage. And we've been here ever since. So that's kind of the Cole's notes on how we got here.
So let's talk a little bit about the music side and some of the things that you have done. Now, you told us how you got started, but involved in like feature films, what kind of projects?
Yeah, it starts, for me, it started with commercial work. And then I think I've done I just actually delivered a film yesterday. So I think I've done 12 or 13 feature films. A lot of them for local directors, or at least Canadian-born directors and producers. And then from there, that led to, like, I've done work for ESPN. We did Monday Night Football for a few years in the World Cup. And just about 2 weeks ago, I delivered a piece for the Olympics, which is airing right now, for the International Olympic Committee. And then, I've got some documentaries coming up, a couple of Netflix pieces and things of that nature. So it's a variety of different projects, but those are the kind of things that I tend towards, are the documentaries and the feature films.
So take us through that process. How does it work? I'm a film producer. I'm down in Toronto or Los Angeles, wherever I am, and I want to get someone to do the music from the soundtrack for my project. How does that? How do they contact you, and then where does it go?
It's a lot of these things tend to be personal relationships is usually where it starts. So it would be a little bit like this conversation, where it would be probably a little more challenging for someone to come up to you and say, "Hey, I live here and I think I'm interesting. Talk to me." Whereas you would probably prefer to get to know somebody first, decide if they're a good fit, and hopefully they come in and we have this conversation. So with a film, it's a lot like that, where it's usually a personal relationship with someone that can either recommend me or can introduce me to someone that they know. You get to know them, they decide if you're a good fit, and then it goes from there. So it usually starts with somebody reaching out to me saying, "Hey, I am a friend of so-and-so's. I saw their last film. I like what you did. I've got a script, and I'm wondering if you'd read it." So I've had projects where I've been given a script, and then 2 years goes by, and you don't hear anything, and then you get a call saying, "Hey, we got funding. We're shooting in a month, and this is our time frame, and you'll have a rough cut about this time. You've got this many weeks to do it. Are you interested?" And so it's kind of the irons in the fire. scenario where, I've had projects where it's taken 2 to 3 years from having spoken to the director to finishing the film. Right. And then another year goes by and you go to the premiere where everyone else sees it for the first time. While that's been happening, I may have had 3 or 4 other movies, in process. So it's just, it's personal relationships. People want to work with people they know or people they would consider to be friends, that you get along with.
So the actual creation of the music for a film, so now you've seen the script, you've maybe even seen a rough cut of the movie, and now it's your turn. A, how long does it take? And B, what's that process like?
Process is arduous and long.
Yeah, I would think.
Fun. So what usually happens is, everyone has a different approach. What I'll tend to do is I'll look at the film, and the first thing I'll say is, let's talk about what it isn't from a musical perspective. So palette approach, maybe we talk about other films that are similar. Often directors and editors will say, well, I've been listening to the score from these films while I was editing. And that will kind of give us a sense of what we call sticks to the picture and what doesn't. So a lot of times a director will say, well, I want an orchestral approach, but I don't want it to be pure. You can bring electronics in, or you can bring quirky elements in, or I really love mandolins, or sometimes they'll have those things that will help sort of figure out what the shape of the music is. And then from there, even with a script, I'll sometimes just write almost like a suite of ideas over 4 or 5 minutes worth and send that to the director first and say, hey, does this sound like your film? I've got a hero theme here, and we've got a bad guy theme, and maybe the love theme or whatever. And usually from there they can sort of determine if it feels and sounds like the movie they're trying to make. And once that's established, I'll talk to directors about finding the edges of the film. So if you're talking about hero music, how big is that? How strong is that? Is it big and bombastic, or is it understated? And once we figure out where those parameters are, then the rest of the film starts to fall into place. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of, writing themes, even away from the edit, and then coming back and watching it against the picture, and then pulling from those themes and saying, well, if that's the main hero theme, we may not hear it until the last 10 minutes, but we're going to pull little elements out throughout the film so you get hints of it. So often the process is almost in reverse, where I'll usually look at the last 10 minutes first, figure that out, and so I know where I'm going musically, and then start working backwards. So I've made that more of a process, whereas when you start, it seems very natural to start at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. And you paint yourself into a corner and realize you can't.
Doesn't work.
You can't get out. So it's a lot of just jumping around, and I think really being open to things and being open to feedback from anyone, from a seasoned director to, my daughter can come in and I can just play something and say, what does this make you feel? And she can be really valuable just by saying, I think that he's sad. It sounds like he's just broken up with his girlfriend, and I can go either, that's bang on, or he's actually plotting to kill someone. So I got to go back and maybe revisit what the music is doing.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Now, do you have a favorite, the project that was just so much fun, and when you were done, you went back, oh, that was great work. I'm just delighted with that. Do you have that?
That's a good question.
That one project that you just, oh wow.
I think there's been a few along the way. I think anytime something finishes and you kind of get a response from people immediately that they feel what you were trying to do. They get it. I had a piece that I did for World Cup. It was when it was in Brazil, 2014. And it was actually, we had our house listed for sale at that time. And a gentleman came through, and it was right before World Cup started. And he was from Brazil. He was wearing the jumpsuit, and he's a big fan. So looking through the house, they came to the room where my studio was, and he was like, what's going on in here? And so this is what I do, and I said I'm doing some stuff for World Cup, and it kind of piqued his interest, and so I had the final piece, and so I just played it for him to see, and he said that feels like my country. that feels like my home. And I was like, oh. So those moments where like he kind of got it, because we put a lot of effort into being culturally correct and musically culturally correct, and that's a challenge when you don't have a culture to bounce it from. You know, it's broadcast, it's got to appeal to everyone, but it also has to. So that was one that kind of stood out as being just on a human level. Somebody.
So conversely, is there that one project that we've all had that was the nightmare project of all time and really hard to get
I think a lot of those are, when they do happen, it's usually the process that I went through to try to get it done maybe wasn't the best. I always kind of look at projects and go, what am I going to learn out of this? And some of those ones that were brutal, I tend to forget the difficulties of those, and I just pull out the lessons, because it will, I think it'd drive you nuts if you could remember. I tend to forget them, to be honest.
That's probably a good thing.
I don't keep them around.
So let's pivot now to a different journey. You and I talked a little bit about people in your industry. Mm-hmm. An observer like me from the outside is going to say, well, gee, all those things you're doing with film and movies and all of that, why aren't you in Toronto or New York or LA or somewhere other than Claresholm? But it works for you.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
It does. I don't think it would have been possible if my career was moved back 20 years, because technology is what's made it possible for people generally to work from anywhere. And I think that with the pandemic, we've seen that really move into the forefront, where as long as you're able to do the work, it's so much to do with personal relationships that it became clear about, I would say probably 10, 12 years ago, that the trajectory of technology would allow for me to kind of live anywhere. And so as we were, as a family, talking about where we wanted to live, I was able to put priorities like, I want my kids to have a safe place to live. I like small towns. I grew up in a small town. The work we were doing, where it was, being in Calgary, and apologies to anyone from Toronto, but if you live in somewhere like Toronto, Calgary's a small town. And we sometimes have a bit of a battle of dealing with people, working with folks who are in major centers like LA or Toronto or New York, where they don't know anything about Calgary other than maybe the Stampede, of which you're very familiar. So if you're doing something that isn't a major hub in the city, in a major industry, there's some uncertainty from people. And so I think we've worked really hard to establish ourselves as, competent and passionate about what we do. Once you get past that initial uncertainty of, like, you live in a little town like Calgary, well, it doesn't matter if now I live in the middle of nowhere. The perception is that Calgary is still a small town to these bigger centers. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, it's not going to hurt me to live in a true small town, because it's really those personal connections. And like we were saying before the interview, like, there's a lot of clients I don't even think they really know where I live. Yeah. And the few that have asked think it's kind of cool that I live, kind of in between two cities and, not in a major place.
Now, because you're a Claresholm resident, you're awfully involved, as I indicated in the opening, in a lot of the things that go on around Claresholm. Talk about some of the things that you do. I know video and all kinds of things, but maybe from your...
Yeah. Well, I sit on the Economic Development Committee. And so right when I started, we had applied as a group for the Rural Northern Immigration Pilot, which is... that's a whole nother topic, but it's the duties of the EDC grew quite a bit, and with Brady, our economic development officer, he was really keen on starting to create shareable content for the town. And as a group, we were talking about, well, who could we hire, and we're probably going to have to go to Calgary, and what's that going to cost? And it got me thinking that I've got a good understanding of audio and music licensing. With with the knowledge I have, could I build on that and turn to video? So around Christmas time, I just grabbed an old camera we had and shot a few pieces for fun for friends that have businesses in town, and just created little shareable pieces of content for them. And that turned into shooting a few things for the town. And I think Brady was great about seeing the value in that. Now I've invested in a couple of cameras and editing equipment, and I'm learning that part of it. And so now I'll go out and shoot things like Canada Day or video for our immigration project. Fair Days is coming up, so that'll all be documented. So we're creating shareable pieces, but also content for like an archive.
Yes.
And I think it's really important, and especially as the town grows and things change, it's nice to look back and go, oh, right, this is what we did on Fair Days this year. Oh, this was the Drift Club demo that year, and things that we can just basically build a library of footage and interviews and material over time of all the things that happen here, because there's a lot that goes on in town.
Yeah, there truly is, as I'm finding out.
Yeah.
So now, as you look ahead, are there any particular directions that you would like to go in the near or distant future, or is it going to be kind of more of the same, or have you got some other plans?
It's a great question. I think from the video standpoint, I think this could go on indefinitely. There's so much happening, and there's so many interesting niche things that we can do in town. I would love to see it grow. My daughter Emily is working with me. She's learning to edit and be getting she's actually getting better than I am. She's very quick, so I'm able to get her doing some of that work, and that allows me to go and shoot more material. And I love the idea of including more people in the process, and anyone who's interested to be able to talk about the basics of cameras or audio, or how to mic somebody. And those are the things I'm hoping that I can start to share from that perspective. And then as far as music is concerned, it's the Wild West. You never know what's around the corner. So we've had some nice projects come along, and I feel like doing the video is actually feeding my understanding of how editing works, and how going from a rough cut to a fine cut, and what the editor has to go through is helping me as a composer understand how the music needs to fit. So they seem kind of unrelated, but I think they're actually quite connected. So one kind of connects to the other, and hopefully I can just keep juggling it all as we go.
Well, that's awesome. When I came to Claresholm, one of the first things I was told is you need to get to know Alec Harrison, because he's going to be around, he's going to do a lot of really cool stuff, and it's going to be a major contribution to our community. And it has been, and I'm sure it will be in the future. So thank you for all you do.
Somebody told you that?
Yeah, well, it was Tanner, and he just makes stuff up.
I was going to say, this is like somebody was pulling a fast one.
No. In fact, I heard that from more than one source, and they're
cool.
Absolutely right. So thank you for all that you do.
Absolutely.
And that wraps up this edition of In Conversation. But don't forget to check out on our Claresholm Public Library YouTube channel all of our In Conversation episodes, including the one with Alec Harrison. And until next time, friends, I'm David Paulson saying thanks so much for being with us today.